But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Isaiah 40:31. And again, it's on coffee mugs. It's on wall art. It's on the Instagram accounts of people in the middle of hard seasons. A diagnosis attached. A relationship ended. A lost job. With an eagle silhouetted against a sunrise and this verse underneath. It's one of the most circulated pieces of religious encouragement in the English-speaking world, and almost no one who posts it has read the 40 verses that precede it. Because if they had, they would know that Isaiah 40:31 is not the conclusion of a devotional reflection on personal resilience. It's the conclusion of one of the most rigorous theological arguments in the entire Old Testament. An argument about why God alone, not the gods of the nation, is capable of being known and trusted. An argument that grounds its conclusion, the strength of those who wait, entirely in a specific, demonstrable, publicly verifiable, supernatural claim about what God can do that no other God or human system can do. And that claim is not that God is powerful. Every ancient religion claimed its God was powerful. It is not that God is loving or good or sovereign in some general sense. For the same reason, it is something far more specific, far more epistemologically precise, and far more demanding. It is that God alone can declare what will happen before it happens, and then make it happen. That is the argument of Isaiah 40. That is what makes God incomparable. That is what the waiting of verse 31 is oriented toward. And that is what has been entirely stripped out of every version of this verse that has ever appeared on a coffee mug. Here is the open question. Isaiah 40:31 says, those who wait for the Lord will renew their strength. The interpreters we will examine today all agree on that. What none of them asks is the question the chapter itself demands. What is the content of the waiting? What has been declared that the waiting is oriented toward? And what is it about this particular God, as opposed to every other object of religious trust, that makes waiting for him the thing that produces a strength no natural human energy can generate or sustain? The answer is in the 40 verses the coffee mug left out. The answer is messianic prophecy. And the strength that mounts up like eagles is not resilience. It is emunah, the prophetically grounded orientation toward the declared and coming act of God, which alone produces a life that does not depend on natural human reserves because it is not drawing from them. So tonight in the slogan series, we read all of Isaiah 40. Definition of terms. The first Hebrew word, wait, chava. Now the Hebrew wait in Isaiah 40:31 is chava, and it is not the word for passive waiting, the waiting of someone sitting in a doctor's office with nothing to do but endure the time. Chava carries the sense of intense, directed, expectant orientation, the straining forward of someone who knows that something specific is coming and is oriented entirely toward its arrival. The Brown Driver Briggs lexicon gives its primary meaning as to wait, look for, hope, expect, with a sense of tension, of a cord drawn taut. It's the same root as the word for a rope or cord under tension, something stretched toward the thing it is bound to. The one who chava is not merely patient. They are pulled toward something declared. Their whole orientation is defined by what is coming. Now, this matters enormously for what the verse is saying. The waiting that renews strength is not the spiritual discipline of sitting quietly before God in contemplative stillness. It's the active, sustained, tension-bearing orientation of a person whose life is organized around a declared future reality. A person who knows what God has said he will do and whose inner resources are constituted not by their own natural energy, but by the firmness of their alignment with that declaration. Waiting is waiting by knowing God's prophetic promises and waiting for that fulfillment. Kava appears elsewhere in Isaiah with the same force. Isaiah 8:17, I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Isaiah 25:9, it will be said on that day, behold, this is our God. We have waited for him, that he might save us. In every case, the waiting is not timeless spiritual patience. It's the sustained orientation of a specific people toward a specific declared act of God that has not yet arrived, but is sincerely coming. Now, next, strength, koach. The word translated strength is koach, capacity, force, ability. What is declared is that those who kava will exchange their koach for a new koach. The verse literally says they will change or exchange strength. The word to pass on is to renew by exchange. The natural human strength is not merely refreshed, it's replaced by something categorically different. The exchange is the key to the verse's argument and the thing most completely lost in the motivational reading. The verse is not saying if you are spiritually tired, waiting on God will recharge your battery. It's saying something more radical. The strength that is produced by prophetic orientation toward the declared God is not the same kind of strength as the natural human koach. It does not run out for the same reasons. It does not depend on the same sources. It's a different category of energy entirely because its source is not inside the person at all. Its source is the externally given, supernaturally confirmed reality of the God who has declared what he will do. Now, Paul understands this precisely in Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. The strength is not Paul's amplified. It's a different strength altogether, one that explains how he has learned to be content in both abundance and need. It is learned because it's the product of sustained prophetic orientation, not natural temperament or spiritual technique. Now, there are three images here: eagles, running, and walking. The three images at the end of the verse are not three separate promises for three different kinds of circumstances. There are three registers of the same reality. The life sustained by prophetic orientation arranged in descending order of intensity. So listen closely to this. Eagles. The most dramatic register of the three, the one who kava soars above the circumstances entirely, carried by something other than their own effort, running without weariness. 2, the sustained exertion of a life actively engaged in the world, without the exhaustion that natural human energy produces. 3, walking or fainting, the ordinary daily unremarkable continuance of life in the world, step by step without collapse. Now, the descending order is deliberate and theologically important. Most motivational readings treat the eagle as the peak, the aspiration, the mountaintop experience, and the walking is the consolation prize for those not yet soaring. But the structure is the opposite. The walking without fainting is the hardest. It's the long obedience in the same direction, the day after day after day of ordinary life without the drama of the eagle or the adrenaline of the race. It's the emunah of Habakkuk 2:4, the steady, sustained, persisting orientation toward the declared word through the long ordinariness of the wait. That is what the prophetically grounded life makes possible. Not the peaks, the whole thing, including especially the ordinary. Now, Isaiah 40, the theological argument, the verse concludes. We can't read verse 31 without reading the chapter it concludes. Isaiah 40 is not a collection of encouragements. It's a structured theological argument with a thesis, a demonstration, and a conclusion. The thesis is stated in verse 9, "Behold your God." The demonstration occupies verses 10 through 26, and the conclusion is verses 27 through 31. The demonstration has two movements. The first, verses 10 through 20, establishes God's incomparable creative power. The nations are as a drop in the bucket. The inhabitants of the earth are like grasshoppers. The princes are brought to nothing. This is the standard ancient Near Eastern claim. Our God is the most powerful. But the second movement, verses 21 through 26, is not more of the same. It introduces a different and more specific claim entirely. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? The question here is not merely about power. It's about knowledge. And what has been told, declared, announced from the beginning. The God of Israel is incomparable, not only because he is powerful, but because he has been declaring what he will do since the foundations of the earth. And what he has declared has come to pass. This is the explicit argument of Isaiah 41, 21 through 23, which is the theological twin of Isaiah 40, and makes the point with prosecutorial directness. Set forth your case, says the Lord. Bring your proofs, says the King of Jacob. Let them bring them, and tell us what is to happen. Tell us the former things, what they are, that we may consider them, and that we may know their outcome, or declare to us the things to come. Tell us what is to come hereafter, that we may know that you are God's. The criterion for being genuinely God, as opposed to an idol, a human projection, a religious concept, is the ability to declare the future and bring it to pass. This is the argument, and verse 31 is its conclusion. The strength of those who wait is the strength of those who are oriented toward a God who has met this criterion, who has declared what he will do and has done it, and who is therefore not a concept, but a demonstrated, publicly verifiable, transcendent phenomenon. The coffee mug has taken the conclusion and thrown away the argument. What remains is a sentiment. What was there is a ground. Now here in the slogan series, we're always presenting 4 common interpretations, and here are the 4. The first is the devotional personal renewal reading. Now, the most common reading treats Isaiah 40:31 as a promise of personal spiritual refreshment for the believer who is tired, discouraged, or depleted. Waiting on the Lord is a spiritual practice. prayer, stillness, contemplative attention that restores the soul's energy. The eagle imagery is the peak of spiritual experience. The running and walking are the sustained output of a renewed devotional life. Now, this reading is not entirely wrong in its application. Genuine encounter with God does restore. Genuine prayer does produce something that passive resignation does not. And the pastoral instinct is to bring this verse to people in depleted seasons. It's not malicious. But the reading commits the standard slogan error. It takes the effect and discards the cause. It tells people that waiting on the Lord renews strength without ever establishing what the waiting is oriented toward. Why this particular God, as opposed to any other object of religious attention, is the one who's being waited on, produces the specific result, or what waiting means as a prophetically structured act rather than a devotional posture. The result is a verse that could be applied to almost any religious or contemplative tradition. Sit quietly before your God, and you will be renewed. Attend to the transcendent, and your reserves will be replenished. The specifically prophetic content, the God who declares and fulfills, the waiting that is oriented toward what has been declared, has vanished entirely. What remains is a generic spirituality wearing an Israelite costume. Now, next, the suffering perseverance reading. A second reading, more theologically serious, uses Isaiah 40:31 as the ground of Christian perseverance under suffering. The believer who waits, who does not lose faith, who does not abandon trust in God through trial, will find that God sustains them in ways that natural human endurance cannot account for. This reading draws on the genuine observation that the believing community often demonstrates a resilience under suffering that is not explicable by natural factors alone. The reading gets closer to the text than the devotional one. It correctly recognizes that the waiting is not passive and that the strength produced is categorically different from natural human stamina. And the connection between prophetic hope and perseverance is genuinely present in the New Testament. Romans 5:3-5, James 1:3-4, Hebrews 12:1-3. But it still does not ask what the waiting is oriented toward. It treats the waiting as a general orientation of trust toward a generally reliable God, the God who has been faithful in the past and can be trusted to be faithful in the future. What it does not press is the specific, declared, publicly verifiable content of that faithfulness, the prophetic announcement, and its historical confirmation that makes the trust not merely a spiritual choice, but a rationally grounded response to a demonstrated phenomenon. The perseverance reading produces stronger Christians. It does not produce the prophetically grounded faith that Isaiah 40 is actually calling for. The third reading, found primarily in Jewish and some Christian scholarly commentaries, correctly recognizes that Isaiah 40:31 is situated within the great consolation of Deutero-Isaiah, I say in quotes, and that the waiting is eschatological, oriented toward the coming salvation of God, the restoration of Israel, the arrival of the servant. This reading connects the kava of verse 31 to the broader prophetic hope, the section, and understands the strength of those who wait as the strength specifically of an eschatologically oriented community. Now, this is the closest of the four readings to what the text is actually saying, and it must be acknowledged as such. The recognition that the waiting is prophetically structured, that it is declared a future object, is precisely the recovery this series here has been calling for throughout. John Oswalt's great commentary on Isaiah and Christopher Seitz's canonical reading of Isaiah all press in this direction with considerable force. But even this reading tends to leave the prophetic content at the level of Israel's national restoration and does not press through to the specific messianic, historically confirmed fulfillment that makes the waiting not merely a corporate religious posture, but a personally available, publicly demonstrable, epistemically grounded orientation. The eschatological reading correctly identifies the direction of the waiting. It does not always identify the specific prophetic content that gives the waiting its rational ground. The declared death and resurrection of the Messiah, fulfilling precisely the portrait the Isaiah servant songs established. In the sight of witnesses, in a historically verifiable correspondence that no human arrangement produced. Now, the motivational therapeutic reading. The fourth and most culturally dominant reading is the one on the coffee mug. Isaiah 40:31 is a promise of personal empowerment, resilience, and renewal for anyone facing difficulty. The eagles are aspiration. The running is peak performance. Walking is steady progress. The verse is a motivational slogan with a theological address, usable by anyone, applicable to any difficulty, requiring no specific theological content to operate. The reading has the least to commend it and the most cultural reach. It is the reading that has most completely severed the verse from its context, its argument, its theological content, and its prophetic ground. It has made of Isaiah's conclusion an inspirational sentiment, and in doing so has not merely misread the verse, but has actively displaced the argument the verse was meant to convey. The pastoral consequence is the most severe of all four readings. The person who comes to Isaiah 40:31 for motivational energy and finds that the eagles do not soar, that the running produces weariness, that the walking ends in collapse, has no recourse. The promise has failed. Either they did not wait correctly, or God does not keep his word, or the verse does not mean what the coffee mug said it meant. What they were never told is that the strength the verse promises is not the amplification of natural human energy, but its replacement by an orientation toward a specific declared historically confirmed reality that does not depend on their emotional reserves, their circumstances, or their felt sense of God's presence. They were given the conclusion without the argument, and the conclusion without an argument is not a ground. It is a sentiment that collapses under the first serious weight. Now let me go through the prophetic structure of Isaiah 40:31. Isaiah 40 must be read as a single continuous argument if verse 31 is to be understood. The chapter opens with the comfort of Jerusalem. Her warfare has ended, her iniquity pardoned. But immediately the question is, on what ground? What justifies this declaration of comfort? What makes it not wishful thinking? The answer is constructed across the chapter in three movements. First, 1 through 11. God is coming. He has declared it. The voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way. What God has declared will stand. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. Verse 8. The ground of the comfort is not a feeling about God. It is the reliability of the declared word. Second, verses 12 through 26. God alone is capable of this declaration. The nation's idols, crafted by human hands, carried by human shoulders, cannot declare anything. They are the products of the human system and cannot therefore speak from outside it. But the God of Israel has been declaring from the foundations of the earth, announced what will happen, identifying what he will do, naming the actors before they exist. Isaiah 44:28 and 45:1 will name Cyrus by name more than a century before he's born. The most dramatic single act of predictive prophecy in the entire canon, impossible to explain within any naturalistic framework. Third, verses 27 through 31. Therefore wait. The complaint of Israel in verse 27, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God, is answered not with emotional reassurance, but with a theological argument. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. And those who kava, who orient themselves toward what he has declared and sustain that orientation through the apparent delay, they are the ones whose strength is exchanged. Their koach is replaced. They mount up, they run, they walk. The waiting of verse 31 is the conclusion of this argument. It's not a free-floating spiritual encouragement. It's the prescribed response to a specific theological demonstration. God alone can declare the future. God has declared it. Therefore, orient your whole life toward what he has declared, and you will have a strength that is not your own. The kava of Isaiah 40:31 and the emunah of Habakkuk 2:4 are describing the same posture from different angles. Emunah is the quality, the steadfastness, the firmness of the orientation. Kava is the act, the taut, expectant, forward-leaning waiting for what has been declared. Together, they describe the life of the person whose inner resources are constituted not by natural human energy, but by prophetic orientation. This is why the strength can be exchanged rather than merely replenished. Natural human strength draws from natural human reserves: psychological resilience, physical health, emotional stability, social support. These reserves are finite and circumstance dependent. They run out. The koach of the person who kava draws from a different source entirely. The externally given, supernaturally confirmed, prophetically grounded reality of the God who has declared what he will do and has done it. That source does not depend on the person's circumstances. It does not fluctuate with their emotional state. It is available in the valley as on the mountain, as accessible in the walk as in the soar, because it is grounded not in the quality of the person's experience, but in the reliability of the God who declared. The profound practical implication is this: the person who knows what God has declared, who is reckoned with the prophetic portrait and its historical fulfillment, who has recognized the Messiah in the correspondence between Isaiah 53 and the gospel accounts, between Psalms 22 and the crucifixion narrative, between Daniel 9 and the timeline of the first century, that person has a ground for their kava that is not available to the person whose waiting is merely a spiritual posture. Their waiting has content. Their orientation has an object. And when the eagles do not soar, when the running produces weariness, when the walk becomes a stumble, they have something to return to that is not inside them and therefore cannot be exhausted by them. Now, Isaiah 40 opens the great consolation section of the book, chapters 40 through 55, that culminates in the four servant songs. The first servant song is Isaiah 42, 1 through 4. The fourth and greatest is Isaiah 52, 13 through 53, 12. And the weighting of Isaiah 40, 31 is, in the canonical structure of the book, waiting for this servant, the one who would be despised and rejected, wounded for our transgressions, led like a lamb to slaughter, and then, after the astonishing declaration of 53, 10 through 11, see the light of life and be satisfied. This means the kava of verse 31 is not a generic spiritual posture. It is prophetically specific. It is oriented toward a declared person. The servant whose portrait is drawn with extraordinary specificity across these chapters, and toward a declared event, the death and vindication of that servant as the ground of the justification of many. Now, the eagle that mounts up is the person whose life is oriented toward this specific declaration, this messianic prophecy. The runner who does not weary is the person sustained by the prophetically grounded knowledge that what was declared has been confirmed, that the servant came, died as declared, and was vindicated as declared. And the walker who does not faint is the person who sustains that orientation through the long ordinariness of daily life, step after step, not because they feel the eagle soaring, but because the ground of their walking is not their feeling, but the declared and confirmed word of the God who does not lie. Now, this is why the motivational reading collapses and what replaces it. The motivational reading of Isaiah 40:31 collapses under exactly the weight it promises to sustain. The person told that waiting on God will renew their strength, who then waits sincerely, persistently, devotionally, and does not feel renewed, has been set up for the most corrosive form of spiritual failure, the failure that feels like God's failure. The prophetically grounded reading does not collapse under that weight, because it does not locate the ground of the strength in the felt experience of renewal. The ground is outside the person entirely. The correspondence between what Isaiah declared about the servant and what the Gospels record about Jesus is not a felt experience. It's a publicly examinable, historically verifiable, intellectually engageable reality that is as available on the worst day as on the best. The eagle is a description of the life sustained by that ground, not a promised feeling. The runner is not someone who feels energized. The walker is not someone who feels confident. They are people whose orientation is toward a declared reality rather than toward the quality of their own experience. And that orientation sustains them precisely because it draws from a source their own experience cannot deplete. This is the recovery Isaiah 40 demands, not a better version of the motivational reading, not a deeper spiritual practice of waiting. but the recognition that the waiting has a specific content, the prophetically declared and historically confirmed Messiah, whose coming was announced in the very section of Isaiah, whose death and vindication are the apex of the declaration, and that the strength of those who wait is the strength of those who know what they are waiting for and why the God they are waiting on can be trusted to deliver it. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. Yes. But the eagle does not soar on sentiment. It does not rise on a motivational poster. It does not ascend on the accumulated weight of sincere but groundless spiritual waiting. The eagle of Isaiah 40:31 mounts up because it is oriented towards something specific, a declared reality, a prophetically announced future, a word that has been spoken and will not fail. The waiting that produces this life is the kava of a people who know what their God has said he will do, and who have seen what he has already done in correspondence with what he declared, and who organize the whole of their existence around the sustained expectation of the fulfillment that is still coming. Isaiah 40 is the opening of the greatest prophetic consolation in the Old Testament. Its argument is not, God is big, so trust him. Its argument is, God alone can declare the future and bring it to pass. The idols can't. The nations can't. The human religious systems can't. And therefore, God alone is the object of a waiting that actually produces something. The kava, oriented toward the declared God, produces koach that is not the person's own. The emunah, oriented toward the prophetically specified servant, produces a life that does not draw from natural human reserves because it is not grounded in them. The four readings we examined all agree that a waiting on God produces strength. None of them asks what gives the waiting its specific content, its rational ground, its epistemic stability when the eagles do not soar, and the running produces weariness, and the walking threatens to end in collapse. None of them supplies the answer that Isaiah 40 itself supplies. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not faint or grow weary. And his understanding is demonstrated publicly, verifiably, in the correspondence between what he declared and what he brought to pass. The servant who was announced in this very chapter, the death that was specified in Isaiah 53, the vindication that was declared before any crucifixion had occurred, the correspondence between the prophetic portrait and the historical event, in the sight of witnesses who did not expect it, in a form no human system arranged. That is the content of the waiting. That is what gives the kava its ground. That is why the strength can be exchanged rather than merely refreshed. That is why the eagle's soaring, the runner's endurance, and the walker's ordinary perseverance are all the same thing. The same prophetically grounded life at three different altitudes. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. Wait for it. It will not disappoint. Because the one who declared it has already shown you that he does not lie. That is Isaiah 40:31. Not a coffee mug, a ground of faith. Now I want to add one more thing before we close, because it's so easy to listen to everything I've just read and just read right past it and say, well, I believe in the Word. I believe Jesus fulfilled the prophets. I believe this and I believe that. Look, let me simplify this very easily for you. If you go into your church next Sunday, or whenever you hear this verse preached, or those like it, and don't hear a word of messianic prophecy in that sermon, and you're comfortable with that, you have a huge problem. I want you to think about that very, very carefully. Jesus is the Word, the revealed Word. We all agree on this. But we must ask, like we do in this video, what Word? If you hear someone preaching Jesus, and especially if you hear them preaching Jesus is the Word, and they do not state clearly that this Word is messianic prophecy and its fulfillment, you have exactly half of Jesus preached, and you have half of it believed if you believe Jesus on that basis.